My parents had taken all the risks to start the business years ago. You know, their house was on the line and stuff like that. That was my biggest concern. Was how can we sort the situation so that they're not going to lose, like, say, their house or whatever it was. That was the biggest sort of factor to me. I thought, well, I got to find a way of getting this problem sorted once and for all, whatever that may be.
If you think putting your company into administration is the end, I want you to think again, because done right, it can be the fresh start that you need. Today, I am having a chat with a client who knows exactly what it feels like. A few years ago, he faced every director's worst nightmare: spiraling debt, sleepless night, pressure from creditors, and he made the tough call to put his business into administration. But he didn't give up. He didn't let the fear or the shame stop him. Instead, he used it as a reset, and now he's rebuilt. In this interview, we're going to hear exactly what it's like to go through administration, how he went through the darkest times, and how he's came out the other side with a business and a future that he's proud of. If you're stuck right now and you think it's game over, this could change the way you see everything. Aled, welcome to the Director First podcast, mate.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's been a while, mate. It's been a while, and you might or might not know, really brave directors. We invite them in for a chat and sort of dispel some myths about insolvency, what it's like, sort of what happened, what it was like before that, and what they're like today. And I saw one of a post on LinkedIn, and I just thought, you know what? I remember the job about 3 years ago now, and I thought, what a great story. So I thought, you know what? I reached out and said, would you mind coming and, sharing your experience with us? And you said yes. So I'm grateful for that. And Ali, can you briefly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your business before the administration?
Yeah, so we're a South Wales-based family business as well. So it started by my parents, and then myself and my two brothers worked in it as well, and we were directors. So what we do primarily is sort of branded clothing, workwear, high-vis clothing, that sort of stuff with branded logos on, which we do all in-house. And the business has been going, I think the original business went limited in 2006. So it's been going for a fair number of years. And then, so 2019, we had believe it or not, everything seems to go wrong in March for us. So 2019, we had a fire in our old premises. So that sort of started making things very tough. The whole insurance process for that was a bit of a nightmare, really. But anyway, we got through that. We started getting back on our feet. We had to get different premises in, all these things. We did that. Then March 2020, obviously COVID hit. So then he was navigating our way through that. And obviously there was lots of different bits of support out there, which helped at the time. So we did that and we got through that bit. And then, then 2021 came, and we had a big growth via our website, which went from pretty much doing nothing to we were doing tens of thousands a month overnight, really. And we scrambled to put things in place, really, to keep up with that demand. Unfortunately, the way we get a lot of our sales was via things like Facebook ads. We were using agencies for that, and there was an algorithm change. I think it was August 2021, and all of a sudden the sales just dropped off like a cliff overnight.
I remember it. I remember it.
Yeah. And unfortunately, the agency we were using, I think, and to be fair to them, it was a bit of a challenge for all these agencies trying to work out why it wasn't working the way it worked before and all this. But in that meantime, we put a load of extra cost and overhead in the business to keep up with the demand we were having. And then we just try and reverse out of that, which we did as quick as we could. But that sort of started leading us down a bit. Then we were in a bit of spot of bother then, which is why then it got to 2022, and we sort of had to look what our options were, and because we were struggling to keep up with the payments we had to make, the directors, we were barely paying ourselves, these sorts of things, and that's when we started looking at what our options were, and that's how I eventually got then introduced you then, Chris, and that's how it all started. But it seems mad. I think it was 3 years ago. It's gone. It does seem to have gone very quick. But yeah, that's a brief summary for you, anyway.
I think there's some interesting things you said there, and like people, like business owners out there will think, right, I want to grow exponentially. You know, like that to a lot of people is a dream, isn't it? Is we're going to start to use Facebook ads, we're going to get some results, and then we're going to be able to scale. And I see it a lot where that can actually, like, too much work can be a problem. I did an interview like this with a quite a famous TikToker, and she exploded overnight, and that's what killed the business. Because when revenues go through the roof, you've then got to mobilize operations. Can your operations cope with that? Can your fulfillment cope with that? Can your credit strategy, you know, because then you've got to get the bloody money in. I've got a pal of mine who's he's gone great guns with this business, and sales has gone through the roof, but now there's a credit control issue. And
Yeah.
it's things that I suppose, sometimes you've got to be careful what you wish for.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for us, when we were going through that sort of stage of growth, I mean, it was brilliant at the time, or it felt brilliant at least. You know, we all of a sudden our staff had like tripled over a couple of months. We had 2 production run sort of shifts going, so we had staff coming in at 6 a.m. in the morning, finishing at 2, and then 2 till 8 p.m. And you know, from as business owner and stuff, and you know, I've always had ambitions to grow the company and stuff. And it was, you know, at that time it felt exciting, it felt great. But then, yeah, as the months went on, and then the sales started to slow down, and then you started really delving into the numbers properly. I mean, even though we were doing all this extra sales, we weren't actually making any more money, or some months still not making any, even though the turnover was like, you know, double, even treble on times what we traditionally done in certain months. We weren't making any money because of, you know, all the extra costs we had to put in to keep up with it. And like you said, you're scrambling and to keep up. Our systems and processes weren't ready for that additional work, so you know, things were going wrong when they, you know, shouldn't have, and then we had to obviously pay to correct those mistakes and things like that. So yeah, like you said, I think everybody wants that growth, but it does come with its challenges, and if you're not, I suppose, ready for that, it can sort of tip you over the edge, and then all of a sudden you think you've got a stable business going somewhere, and then 6 months later, it's you end up in a situation like we were in. It's a bit like, well, and the other thing which I probably didn't mention in the brief summary, was we had sort of debts and stuff pre-COVID that we'd taken over. You know, just normal business stuff, like, you know, we'd had like a loan and things like that from the bank to pay off an overdraft, things like that. And you know, you still got to pay those debts, but then the sales weren't coming in to pay for it all. Then, you know, it's like then you, as the term, you know, robbing Peter to pay Paul. You know, you're just trying to fight fires basically, and then it can very quickly get out of control.
I think what I've seen, sort of since 2020, maybe a little bit before, is when there's an opportunity to grow a business, a lot of time people will need to take on debt to sort of ride that wave. And if I remember, was there any debt that was personally guaranteed, Aled?
Yeah, we had a couple of things. Well, we had a bank loan which was actually secured against my parents' house. And then there was a credit facility as well, which I had personally guaranteed. And of course, when you get in these situations, then you're thinking, well, you know, what are we going to do there now? Obviously, because first thing, of course, we never been in that situations. We didn't understand or didn't realize what are the exact terms of a personal guarantee? What does that mean? And all those. So obviously, that's why then when we came to yourself, then you were able to put us in touch with people who could give us a bit of guidance on what that would mean if the worst was to happen, and which was a big help, because it meant that we knew, well, you know, I think you have this impression when you do a personal guarantee or something that, you know, someone's going to come and throw you out the house in a few days' time. It's not quite the reality. Obviously, you've got to do something about it, but you know, there are ways to mitigate it and get around it without that happening. But yeah, because imagine my parents, obviously they're at retirement age. You know, they've put a lot of time and effort into our business over the years. They now, you know, they take a step back now. But you know, they were obviously, you know, very worried about the situation that their house was secured against those loans, and that's the thing that a lot of people, I think, who don't run businesses don't realize is, you know, those are the sort of risks and stuff you have to take when you run a business. If you want to get finance, if you want to get certain things in place, you very often have to do these things. And people, I don't think, always quite appreciate that when, you know, when people are working for someone, obviously they expect to get paid on time and all that, as understandably so, but don't always, I think, understand how much the owners do in the background to make all that happen.
Yeah, listen, it's, a business owner, we go to work to make a profit, don't we? But what people don't see is the risk that we take,
Yeah.
because if it doesn't work, you've touched on it before, you wasn't taking any salary at the time, where you'd be taking reduced salaries. And I've had it before where, like, you're starting something off, you don't know whether it's going to work or not, and you're not taking an income. And like, I've trial ventures before that haven't worked. They've cost us a lot of money. It's like, I don't know about you, but I've had a go at business a few times over the years, and a lot of the time it doesn't work out. Like, for me, it's like, it didn't work out, and not only did I, at those times, my mates who have got like consistent jobs, they're getting jobs, they're getting the salary, they're getting the pension, they're getting their holidays paid. I'm not getting any of that, and I'm losing money as well. So when you do start to make a profit, fingers crossed one day, it's like, you deserve that success, because people forget that they're just, it's not that they forget, they're just not aware of the stuff that you've got to go through. I mean, you had a wave to ride, and to ride that wave, you've actually put your balls on the line. It's a big risk, that, isn't it? It's like, I'm willing to back this personally. People just don't see it. They don't understand the risk that directors go through. And again, when the tide turns, it's a typical story, isn't it? You're still stuck with those high debts to service, with revenues coming down. There was a fire that you couldn't have anticipated, and then a global pandemic. And so a lot of these issues, it wasn't caused by you. If anything, you've done everything you can to make that business successful. What were the signs, Aled, that where you started to think, you know what, we're not going to make it here? You touched on looking at the numbers. How did it all come about?
To be honest, yeah, so a lot of the period when we all went through, it's a bit of a blur, because it was, I mean, I can't remember exactly how long it all took, but it seemed to happen in about, I don't know, I'd say 6 to 8 weeks, really. And I was having to take so many calls a day about, from various people, a lot of ones you put me in touch with, just to line everything up and things. It was so hectic. But I think what it was really was, we were in this position where, we had to get payment plans set to things with HMRC, because we'd fallen behind on that. We were obviously then in situations there with suppliers who we'd run up, sort of bills with. And those suppliers had given us that credit. Mind, we were on paper worthy of that credit, so they would give us the credit for it. But then, it was coming around the time when those bills were paid, and we couldn't afford to pay them. So, you were trying everything you could. You'd be, okay, we'll do stage payments, we'll do this, we'll do that. And, I know, obviously, again, you probably see yourself, Chris, and you know this better than anyone really with your job. I think people think that when this happens, that it's just because the directors are sorting themselves out, and they think, sod all we owe the money to. Yeah, and that's not, I get to hand on heart say that's not what happened in our case. What happened with us is, as soon as we were in that position, we would drop in the money we'd taken out of the business, which was never enormous amounts, I'll be honest. We did okay over the years, don't get me wrong, but it was never huge amounts of money. And all of a sudden then it's in a position where, well, the only way we can try and find ways to pay some bills, we'll have to take less. So we kept doing that. We obviously then we laid off staff that we'd taken on to keep up with that growth, to save money there. But it was just, whatever we did, it was never going to be enough. It was always going to be really tough to get out of that situation, because you still got to pay the debts down. You've got your suppliers to pay, you've got your overheads to pay. And it just wasn't really much. It was hard to see any light at the end of the tunnel at that point, I think we'd gone through the stage of thinking, right, if we get to this amount of sales next month, we'll have a bit more money. Because, it's like with cash flow and things, you can make a good profit on paper one month. Doesn't necessarily mean you've got that money in the bank. Most of the time you haven't. It's paying suppliers, it's getting the next stock in, whatever it is. I think we just sort of looked at it then and thought, right, we have to see what the alternatives are. And that's when we then obviously spoke to yourself, and we looked at what the options were, and things started rolling from there. Then,
what were your biggest fears back then? You know, if you had to list them, you know, because people, by the time they pick the phone up to me, they're fried. They've been not sleeping correctly. They're not in a great state. What were going on for you back then?
I mean, in general, I'm quite a laid back person. I don't tend to get too stressed about things generally. I suppose half glass full. I always think, well, we'll find, whatever the problem is, we'll find a way to sort it, sort of thing. But I say we had HMRC payment plans in place, and we just couldn't. It was hard to keep up with it. So we did a visit off one of their sort of collection agents, whatever they call back then, which is never pleasant when you've got sort of HMRC literally in your office. And as you know, they just turn up unannounced. And I thought, well, and my main concern really was what this was going to be for my parents. My parents had taken all the risk to start the business years ago. Their house was on the line and stuff like that. That was my biggest concern. Was how can we sort the situation so that they're not going to lose, like, say, their house or whatever it was. That was the biggest sort of factor to me. I thought, well, I got to find a way of getting this problem sorted once and for all, whatever that may be. I didn't really know, what like administration would look like. Like other people, I'd seen people do it and they started up again and get a bit of backlash for it and stuff like that. And I suppose from a reputational point of view, I didn't really want to do that either initially, because I thought, I suppose I didn't want to be seen as we'd failed either, especially as I'd taken over running the business as well for, say, the previously, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 years before that as well.
I think it must be really hard for people who take on businesses from, multi-generational businesses. It's like,
yeah,
I have recently done an interview like this with a 120-year-old shoe shop. So that's like multi-generations, and like his biggest worry, it was like, telling his mum and dad, and when he did, they actually said to him, we can't believe you haven't done this sooner, because there's a lot of pride attached to our businesses, isn't it? And like,
of course, yeah.
What will people think? Like, mate, I've been there. Like, I've been that guy who had to put a business through insolvency, and I'm thinking, oh my God, everybody's going to be talking about me, And I think you get to realise that, bar the odd knobhead who might, people are that bothered about themselves. They've got their own stuff going on in their head. They don't have a great deal of time and attention to really give thought to anybody else. But it were a really tough time, mate. And I can empathise that. Like, I've been where you're at. It was a real dark time in my life.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be fair as well, I didn't really. I mean, obviously, all our family knew because we all work here, so they knew what was going on. I didn't really tell many people outside of that. Literally, a couple of very close mates, like 2 of them. Other than that, no one else. Obviously, people in our industry obviously would have known, like suppliers, or else we had to speak to them about things. But no one who I would class as people I would speak to about things, because I suppose there was an element of. It's a shame. It hits your pride that you have to go down that route and things like that. But like you said, the reality is that most people they're so wrapped up in their own stuff. Understandably so. Everyone's got so much more stuff going on. They haven't got time to really worry about what's going on in my life. So nobody really probably knew any different. I mean, that was the thing about it, was we did it and we got going, and so we've been going through this sort of during the last couple of years of trying to get back on our feet, and we're sort of finally getting it now. And it's probably hardly anyone knew it was happening. But like you said, it's the thing. The things that make it hard there is, like, through that period, we've had to take, even now, like, I don't take anywhere near probably the money that I probably should take from the business yet, because it's been, the first few years been all about getting certain debts paid off and all that sort of stuff. So again, we're still even having done that decision, even though it was the right decision, there were still sacrifices made by doing that decision as well. It wasn't like, we woke up one day, business administration, next day, everything's great, and I'm, like you said, I'm in Marbella every weekend. That's not the case, but it's given us an opportunity to sort of come back and try and make something of the company then, which is ultimately, I think, that was the right move for us.
And it's a journey, isn't it? So for people that are watching, a pre-pack administration is where you put a business into administration to get some protection around the business. But before that, a valuation is conducted on the assets of the business, the intangible assets, the tangible assets, the goodwill, and there's a marketing period where the business is sold, business is marketed to potential buyers, and that really worries people because they think, oh my god, I'm going to lose my business.
Yeah.
Now, at the end of that marketing period, you make an offer to the agent. It gets accepted by the agent, and then the business is sold before it goes into administration. So the day after, in theory, you've got a fresh start without the legacy unsecured debts. But like you say, you've got a lot of stuff to deal with still, like staff need to be transferred over. When you bought the business, Aled, did you pay for it over terms? I can't remember the exact details. It's so long ago.
Yeah, so what we did was, I mean, just because of the nature of our business, we've got machinery here on site and stuff. So, which fortunately we had, most of that was all sort of paid for at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So what we did was we used, and again, you put me in contact with a couple of people who were able to help with this. So we spoke to like a finance broker, and what we did was we did a sort of asset finance on the machinery we already had, which, I mean, before this, I would have known you could do that on machinery. This already, I know obviously about finance on machinery from buying stuff in the past, brand new, but I didn't realize you could get money out of existing assets like that. So what we did, we took a loan out basically secured against the assets that we had. So that was machinery and things like that. And effectively, obviously, you're giving title to that company on that, so that the machinery becomes them while this debt is outstanding. And that's how we took a loan off them for that, which was basically gave us the initial deposit to make the payment to the administrators for the new company. For the old company. And we agreed, I think it was I'm pretty sure it was 6 months then to pay off the remainder. Yeah.
And that's what's important here is like when you're going through a process, not everything's a little bit different. There's different nuances, there's different worries, there's different creditors. And you've got to try and, from our point of view, you've got to think creatively and go, right, how do we get from A to B legally? Where are the problems? If funding's a problem, and it can be for lots of directors, it's like, well, how can we help assist them find the money? So we bring a number of different people to the table. We've mentioned we have really good finance brokers. Another big problem today, even more so in 2025 than previous, is these personal guarantees. Because people will sign a personal guarantee, never really thinking that things are going to change, but they do change. Personal guarantee gets called in. Can you talk us through what happened there, mate, when it comes to your personal guarantees? How were they dealt with?
So again, you introduced me to a guy there, Gary, who Gary's brilliant, to be fair. So again, straight out thing, that was the key through all this. Because obviously, again, I was the person here that had to deal with all this stuff, and I'd never done this before, so I had no idea. I was completely bluffing my way through it, trying to work out what the next steps were and all this. My family was just sort of, right, you know what's best with it. You go off and do it. And it was okay. But then obviously very aware that I needed to try and get this as right as possible because of the risks involved. So yeah, I spoke to Gary. Gary was great at the start in terms of reassuring us that, look, even though these are in place, there's ways we can sort this out. And, there's routes we can take to get this sorted over time, etc., which was, a big reassurance to start with, because obviously we're talking about, decent amounts of money here, and we were like, well, we haven't got the money to do it. So there was a personal guarantee on a credit facility I had, and there was no way I could pay that personally. So yeah, we went through it all with Gary. He then wrote to these various sort of finance institutions then about what the situation was. Obviously, he was then able to speak to them, negotiate on our behalf then. And then we just basically put sort of plans in place then, payment plans, to get the amounts paid off. So the secured ones, obviously, you can't do anything about. They've got a security over the debt, so the whole amount's got to be paid. With some of them, which are more just personal guarantee ones, I mean, Gary seems to know, not I wouldn't say loopholes, but obviously there's routes that they can look to reduce how much you pay back because, just down to obviously they're charging you interest, etc. I don't know the exact legalities of it, but yeah, so on one of the ones Gary managed to get us quite a chunk knocked off, which was obviously very helpful. But then we just had these plans set up, and then we just paid them off over time. I mean, we finished on 2 of those now. Still got one left, but yeah, I mean, it was an absolute godsend, really.
Yeah, listen, I love what I like about Gary. Some people will have the first chat with him and think, "Oh my word," because he's quite straight to the point, isn't he? He says, "Listen, these are the problems. This is what will happen if you don't deal with it." And I mean, I've worked with him for years. He under promises and over delivers. And I've never, in all the years I've introduced someone to Gary Whitehead, I've never had one person. I've had a few people ring me after the first goal because he's frightened them to death. But I've never had someone at the end of it go, he was not brilliant. And the key message here is listen, if you've got personal guarantees that are going to crystallize as a result of an insolvency, yet people who are watching this, they can go out there and start to negotiate on their own behalf. But it's like I could do my own tax return at the end of the year and I'd have a very different outcome as opposed to perhaps, get an accountant to do it. So this stuff, you've got to try and invest in figuring out the problem if you've got that means to do it. I mean, was he obviously there would have been a charge for him helping you do this. It sounds like it was he got you to where you needed to get to.
Yeah, no, obviously Gary charges something for his services. Again, he's got his own business to run, obviously. But I mean, I'll be completely frank. When my dad is still works every day now, and he's very old school in some of his thoughts. He saw some of the bills come from Gary. He's like, well, can't we do this? Can't we do this ourselves and save ourselves a lot of money? And I was like, well, I suppose theoretically we could, but I don't know where to start. I don't know what are the points of we can leverage to try and get a better negotiation. I mean, I really don't know. I don't know. Like anybody else, I thought it's personally guaranteed. That means I've got to pay all that money back, and I didn't know where to start with that. So it was more. It was also, don't get me wrong, we've had to pay for it, but I think it's like anything when you've had a service or someone and it's been a good service and it's solved your problem, you're happy to pay that because that's you've had the outcome you want. It saved me a lot of time as well because I'd had to have dealt with that as well on top of other stuff. I mean, there was so many things to line up to try and get this to go to work. That's all I was doing all day was this basically for about 6 weeks. And if I had to add that into the mix as well, and that was the biggest pressure point really, because that was, like I said, with the one person guaranteed facility, but my parents' house was secured against a loan, that was my biggest fear, my biggest worry was what would we do about that? So it took away one of the biggest problems. I mean, he dealt with it, got it all set up, and we just had to, do our bit then, which make sure we could keep up the payments then. And we obviously knew what the consequences were if we couldn't keep up those payments. But he managed to negotiate something for us, which meant we could afford that each month. It obviously meant, we had to stretch a bit to get it paid because, the bank had their security and they don't have to, I suppose, set up these plans. But it just gave us that bit of breathing room every month then that we were able to get it done, which is something, when I think of where we were at a couple months before we started this process, I would have, it didn't seem likely we'd get to that position in a few years.
No, well, listen, I'm just so glad that I'm so glad. Listen, I'm really grateful that you work with us. What made you? Because when you're going through this, most people, I say to them, listen, get more than one opinion. It's a really big decision. Don't jump into bed with the first person you speak to, even if it's me. What made you decide to work with me, Aled?
I think if I remember correctly, I think I'd seen some of your stuff on LinkedIn, I think. I'm pretty sure that was how I initially came across you. And then, we had an initial chat and it just felt right to me from the start to, again, you were very straightforward with me in terms of, first of all, it's not the end of the world and we can sort this out, but also that, there are steps you'll have to take and some difficult decisions have got to be made. So, it just felt right to me from the start. It worked and, very appreciative of the, because, you were always on the end of the phone with me if I needed you and things like that, just for a bit of a steer on how we could handle certain situations. And because again, it was something I'd never been through, so I didn't really have a clue where to start. Hopefully it's something I won't have to go through again. But it was that sort of hands-on help and support was absolutely invaluable, really.
I appreciate that, mate. I mean, if you look back at it now, is there anything else that you perhaps would have done differently?
If, in all honesty, probably done it slightly earlier, maybe. If we hadn't had that big growth the previous year with our website, then I think we probably would have been pushed into the situation a bit earlier anyway. But yeah, it was, looking back now, it was the right move to do. And like, as we did this process. We obviously wanted to keep relationships with certain suppliers and stuff like that. So, we kept them very informed. And we set up things with them then to make sure that then they didn't, that obviously we keep working with them. I think we set up, I think it was 4 or 5 of those. Very proud of the fact that we managed the 3 of those. We got that completely done and sorted, and we still work with those people now. There was 1 or 2 who, like anything, right? Businesses fail occasionally. And we deal with some of our suppliers are big multinational, manufacturers and stuff. So, the sort of money we owe them wasn't going to be, life changing for their business. Understandably, it's got to be paid, but they weren't really willing to work with us then in terms of making it affordable to us. It became very, it's got to be this or nothing. And, I think they try to kind of put us, one of them in particular, sort of try to put us over a barrel a bit with it. And sort of in the end, I just said, well, we just won't do it then. And we don't work with them anymore. And don't get me wrong, that presented some challenges because we'd worked with them for years and things like that. But, there's, it's funny. Obviously, there's plenty of other people out there willing to work with us, and we just got on with it. But the ones who did help out with us and were willing to have a chat sometimes if things were a bit tight, we're still working with them. They still get our business. So, and their sort of loyalty to us with that, we won't forget that. So, when it comes to certain situations, I mean, a prime example was a few weeks back. We had a big job come in when we sent out quotes to a couple of the wholesalers we use for this certain product. One of them came back ever so slightly cheaper than the one we tend to use most of, one of the ones we had a payment plan with. We spoke to them and we just said, well, look, this is a situation. Could you match that price for us on this one job? They said, yeah. So because of our loyalty to them, we went with them. We could very easily just have said, well, they're a little bit out there percentage-wise on the price. We'll go with this cheaper one. But because we've worked with them so closely the last couple of years to try and get this thing sorted, and they obviously showed us a bit of loyalty, we made sure we gave them that business. That's business is about people ultimately. You buy from people, don't you? So,
and listen, in business, that like the longer you're in it, you start to realize actually there are some people that will stick with you and they'll do what they say they're going to do, and I think that was really nice about what when you went through this. And obviously, some creditors don't get paid, HMRC, banks, etc. But you actually went out there, and even though there was no legal obligation to pay these suppliers, what you did is in the new code, you said, listen, I want to try and make this right with you, and I'll pay over a period of time. And what I think people forget the other side of the coin here. Like everyone's dreading calling a supplier saying, I can't pay my bill, or I'm going to go through a process and I'm going into liquidation, insolvency. So if you just imagine it from the point of view of a creditor at the moment, problem 1 is I've got an unpaid debt, and that is a problem. We need the money in. But their bigger problem is not only have I got an unpaid debt, especially like a family business for you that's gone for years and years and years and been a great customer, but in this insolvency, I'm going to lose a client that, other than this last 6 months, has been a really, really good client. So I think the message for people is like having those tough conversations with suppliers. I mean, how did your conversation with the suppliers go? Could you sort of talk us through it, what they were like? What, did it surprise you? How did it pan out?
Well, I think the biggest surprise, and I think this is why I picked this up quite early on, really from speaking to yourself and the finance broker industry too as well. Steve was brilliant with this as well. Was, like you said, there's no legal obligation for you to do it. So without sounding, obviously I wanted to make things right because I didn't want to leave a load of people unpaid. so we wanted to keep working with some of these suppliers. So we wanted to try and get something in place, but also realize that without being too blunt about it, it had to be on our terms. And if it wasn't, we were going to have to be prepared to walk away. So we had those conversations with them, and look, they weren't easy conversations to have, again, because these are people you've been speaking on the phone, a month before. You're like, look, we'll get this paid, give us a little bit of time, etc., because you're just trying to, get a few orders in, get a few sales and help pay these debts. And all of a sudden now you're ringing them up saying, look, the company's gonna have to go into administration, this is what we're gonna do, blah blah. It's not easy to do that. But in the main, most of them were receptive to it, probably because I'm assuming they've had to deal with these situations before. So they understood, what it meant for them. It meant if they would work with us, they would get their debt paid off. If they didn't work with us, they wouldn't. So it was a case of, they had to work with us. Probably as well, they had to trust the fact that I was saying what I could pay back a month was, I wasn't just, sorry to swear, but bullshitting them and just saying I could only pay this much when really I could pay 5 times as much. They had to trust us with that. But, what we made sure was we had these plans in place. They got paid off, on time as agreed. Granted, there was still the odd time where, I think we had one, for instance, where we were late a couple times making the actual payment, but we would just keep in touch with them and say, look, it's a bit tight this month. We'll get this paid towards the end of the month. And, what I found in the main was people were receptive to that because ultimately they got what they wanted to, which was to get their money back. Obviously not as quick as they would like, but it was better than the alternative. So for me, it just made me think, well, this has got to be on our terms. It can't be that if someone wants me to pay twice as much back, I've got to be paid to walk away from that because I don't have to do this. And yeah, that was the main thing I learned from it, really. And to be fair, I think, like I said, we set 5, we paid off all 3, and 2 of them we had to walk away from. But in the long term, it was the right move because those suppliers weren't going to be, they weren't willing to help us at that petition. But, when you think over, like you said, the years and years we've been trading with them, put a lot of business their way and paid them, they've done right out of us over the years. So, I thought to myself, well, if they're not willing to help us with this, fair enough. I understand it's a business decision, but we haven't got to do this, so we'll just walk away and, we'll have to just call it a day with them, that sort of thing. But yeah, like you say, they're not easy conversations to have, but, once you've had 1 or 2 of them, you realise really where the points are that you can negotiate on, where you can't,
I think what's important for people to understand as well is that I've seen this go the other way as well. So let's say there's an insolvency, administration, liquidation, and the directors want to pay the suppliers in the new company, but they either make too generous an offer or they agree to terms that they're never, ever going to be able to adhere to. And what ends up happening is the debt from the insolvent business that could have been written off has now pulled down the new company.
Yeah.
You've got to be real. And I think it boils down to this as well. A lot of these issues can either be avoided altogether, they can be earlier based on really accurate numbers, having that management information, profit and loss, reviewing it on a monthly basis, what's coming in, what's going out, what's the cash flow looking like over the next 13 weeks. So, if you're watching this, just be careful if you're going to start dealing up with suppliers post insolvency. It's got to be on your terms. Sorry, mate, go on. You were going to say.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, the other thing as well, like you spot on, really, we actually had some conversations about that where we were looking at, well, which suppliers do we want to look at doing this with? And again, morally, we want to do it with all of them because, we dealt with so many people for years, we got personal relationships with them, all these things. You didn't want to leave anyone unpaid. But like you said, we got to the point where we were looking at, well, we can only do so many because if we do too many, like you said, the new company will struggle. And the other point to consider, which we had to go through, might not be the same for everybody else, but what we had to deal with was we couldn't get credit terms with any of our suppliers by doing this. So we were on pro forma terms as well. So, that cash flow, I mean, I'm sure most business owners, cash flow is the bane of their life anyway. But I mean, we've literally had to manage every penny in and out of this company for the last 3 years because we had to make sure that if we had a payment in, we had to make sure that we used that in the best way possible to make sure that the following week we had the money we needed to pay whatever debts became due at that point. it's been, it's been tough. Like I said, if we hadn't been so selective maybe with those suppliers, then, we may not have got through it. The other thing as well, we probably looked at it, we sort of listed them out and we went through it and just thought, well, if it's a supplier that we can do without, we're going to have to do without them. Because otherwise we could have very easily been in a position where we were paying back thousands and thousands of pounds every month back to pay off these debts. And then the new company would have been an exact same problem as we were in the old company. And then what was the point doing it all, So yeah, you have got to be careful doing that bit. And I think, if I remember rightly, on one or two of ours, we started off maybe doing a little bit too much to start, and we then just had a chat with them again, negotiated back to something a bit more manageable for us. And they were receptive to that because, they'd seen to that point that we were paying. So, yeah, to make it brief, but it is, I suppose there's no like right or wrong answer to either, because we could have just done none of the suppliers and just gone off on our own and found new suppliers for everything. But I suppose we sort of did a bit of a mix between the two. We managed to keep hold of our main suppliers and deal with them still. Some of the others we had to just sort of walk away from. But interesting enough, some of the ones we did leave small debts with in the interim have now come back to us, and they're now knocking on our door to do business with us.
I am glad you've said that. I am so, because that's like suppliers. I mean, I'm not making light of, in insolvency, some people don't get paid, and that's, no one ever sets out to do that. You definitely didn't, okay? But the reality is a lot of suppliers, they will factor it in, they will be insured against the debts. And once there's a little bit of water, I mean, some people post-insolvency will still support you, not every supplier, but now there's a bit of water under the bridge. The fact that people are knocking on your door who want to work with you again just shows that, like, you can, it's not the end, is it? And that's probably one of my final questions, Aled, is now that the administration is done, it's, in the distant past, how do you feel about the process that you did 3 years ago?
Well, certainly that was the right thing to do. And I think, like you said, then having those same people who, were unfortunately not able to get paid at the end of it, now knocking on our door to work with us again, I think kind of just, hits home really that it was the right thing to do, because ultimately, like you said, a lot of them will have insured the debt, and like obviously they've got a claim on the insurance then and things, but that's why they do that, isn't it? Is to protect themselves in these situations. So it was definitely the right thing to do. And it's given us now, like I said, it had been a very tough 3 years. It's not what everyone thinks it is, where you literally close one day, open the next day, and everything's great again. It's not like that, but it's been a tough 3 years, but we're now in a position where, we can take our business forward again. And obviously a lot of lessons have been learned on the way. So hopefully we would avoid ever getting into that situation again. But also, and that's, businesses do fail sometimes, and sometimes it's out of your hands. But yeah, I certainly wouldn't. At least if I ever got in that situation again, I think I would know to react earlier. I'd know that there is help and support out there, and there is ways of getting through it, as opposed to thinking, the world's going to end and I'm going to be made homeless. It's not, but there are ways through it, and yeah, and that's thanks to yourself, Chris, and the other people you put us in touch with, really.
It's a pleasure. Aled, thank you for sharing your story with us.
No problem.
Yeah. I mean, listen, we're really grateful that you decided to use us, and obviously, if there's anything we can ever do in the future, let us know. But I'm going to end the podcast here. You've been a really good guest. Thank you for your time, my friend, and yeah, God bless you.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.